Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Event Industry News podcast. I'm Adam Parry, editor at Event Industry News, and today I am joined by Rachel Butler, who is Head of Marketing and Brand Communications at Marble London. My notes over here say that your heritage is actually based in festivals, music and arts, which is really interesting. It's kind of how I got into the events industry. And from my understanding, Marble was kind of the collaboration of three agencies coming together to kind of join forces historically. Is that right, Rachel?
Yeah, that's right. So quite varied background in comparison to kind of where we are now. So the business itself was initially, we have four kind of co-founders, and they initially had three separate businesses, as you mentioned. So one is focusing on event production and the kind of logistics side, pulling the events together. One more around event planning and project management, and then one is focused on tech production and the kind of sound and lighting kit from that side. So it really made sense for the guys to merge, from the fact that they constantly were kind of overlapping and working together, and noticed that actually there'll be way more benefits for our clients if they kind of banded together and formed one kind of end-to-end service company rather than kind of working across multiple different other agencies. So that's essentially how Marble formed quite a few years ago now, and the team themselves, their heritage is very much within kind of music festivals, a little bit of private events too, and music and the arts, as you say. But over the last 6 years or so, we've very much kind of transitioned into kind of a bit more of the B2B arena, and covering kind of a wide span of industries, including finance, tech, fashion, and wellness. So a little bit of everything, really.
It's really interesting. Your founders and the business is clearly been bought out of creating people experiences, right? There's, some of the bigger festivals and events definitely obviously have sponsors and a corporate angle to them when you kind of get up to the big stuff. But, festivals are rooted in creating memorable experiences for people that they want to return to year on year, right? And it's really interesting to see, obviously, how that's translating now into the B2B world. We hear festivalization a lot, don't we? But you guys have kind of come through that from grassroots, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting, and it's exactly as you're saying. It's that emotive experience behind the event or the activation that's really key, and that we find is a really cool part of a lot of the projects we work on. And with that kind of slight pivot and transition into more of the kind of tech arena, kind of networking based events, finance, what we're really seeing is that desire from a lot of those big players to really stand out and create something that's breaking the norm and it's a little bit different. There's a lot of kind of conversations in white rooms and lots of kind of fairly scaled back, I suppose, kind of, networking events and conferences, and they really want to inject a bit more kind of colour, a bit more of an experience, and, kind of new tech. A lot of these companies themselves as well obviously speak around kind of innovation and emerging technologies, and they really need to kind of bring that into their own kind of brand presence at some of these experiences. So it's a really interesting kind of area to move into.
What do you think's driving, and I suppose this is what we're here today to talk about, is your report. What's driving the desire to put some extra oomph and pizzazz into what I suppose is really an event aimed on learning and content and networking, so it doesn't necessarily need everything else? What's driving the desire to want to create those, not just people in a white box room chatting? What do you think that is?
Well, no, fair point. I think as well, we do underestimate the desire from the participants there to actually have that kind of, I guess, confidence to network and to, I mean, it's such a crowded space as well for them to choose which of those events are really going to kind of, where they're going to get that knowledge they need, where they're going to kind of have that thought leadership angle that they really need to drive themselves forward and their businesses forward. So within such a crowded marketplace, it's really key for these businesses to have something which stands out, to have something that those participants are going to go away and share, and essentially going to drive them forward and help increase their presence within their own markets too. And I think there's lessons to be learned really from the B2C world as well. So outside of their kind of day-to-day roles, a lot of the kind of B2C world now is making leaps forward within integrating more tech into a lot of their physical campaigns. There's much more of a kind of merge, which of course we're seeing with the current climate, between digital and physical events and campaigns. And so if that's your experience in your kind of day-to-day life with other kind of elements, then that should also be kind of brought into the business world too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I suppose just while you've been speaking about that, I've been thinking about my own experiences as an individual when it comes to hospitality, me going out to eat, right? You know, you go into a McDonald's, it's not really a memorable experience, is it? It's kind of, it's there to serve a purpose, fine, whatever. But when I want to spend a little bit more money, when I want an experience, you know, that definitely plays into what restaurants or units I go into. And it could be the open fire, the fanfare of the chefs being on display and cooking, the way the waiters and everything interact with you. And it's a totally different play, isn't it? One's very memorable, the other one's just, you've forgotten about it as soon as you walk out of the room. So if you're a brand or a corporate and you're spending lots of money on captivating the minds of people and obviously encourage them to spend money with you or continue to spend money with you, then making an experience memorable, even if it is a presentation about product, service or networking, that definitely obviously clearly goes towards helping along with that. So it's a worthwhile investment. Let's have a little bit look at the report then. As opposed to first start off, you know, reports like this, they're no small undertaking. It takes a lot of effort to kind of start to figure out the questioning. Yours goes into quite a bit of detail around different elements of experiences, the value of them, what people get out of them, why they're important. And then you've obviously got to go out there, you've got to interview people, and you've got to write it all up and make it look great so people can digest it afterwards. Why did Marble London decide to take this on board and do this piece of work, which looks like to me is free for anybody to kind of go download and check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose twofold really. There's the side of it that as we were moving more into, as I mentioned, the industries over the last few years that include kind of marketing teams that we're working with. So traditionally we worked with events teams, but now that we're working a bit more closely with marketing teams and communications teams, outside of our knowledge and experience that we've gained with our current clients, we really wanted to get a broader scope of how the whole of that industry, their feelings and perception towards live experiences. And we were having a look ourselves online to see kind of, you know, what's the general consensus, how do marketing teams perceive events within their marketing strategies, how do they regard that? We have our own feelings, but we'd like to know kind of, you know, what's the general consensus, as I mentioned. And there really wasn't anything out there as far as we could see. So essentially the research was to help us kind of gain more of an understanding of our target audience, and help as well kind of use that to I suppose educate some of our clients as well as kind of what their industry peers are thinking and how they're perceiving, how they might kind of conduct their experiences. And then in itself as well to help kind of educate our industry and our industry peers and help them kind of understand the target market that they're going out to and what that looks like. So kind of twofold really.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I suppose one of the things that I found this report really good for is proving the value of events, right? Events are very emotive, physical things that we experience, and we experience a lot of them. And there's, you know, huge budgets spent on experiences. They, you know, are somewhat more expensive to do than, let's say, digital-led campaigns, but there's so many intangibles around them that are valuable that you can't get through any other medium. And I suppose this is what the report kind of discusses and kind of focuses on, which is the value of events as part of the marketing mix, and how that can all be connected up. Let's have a look at some of the statistics then. You know, this podcast is being recorded still during a lockdown, so I appreciate some of the statistics and kind of the way that people are feeling may have shifted ever so slightly, but I think it's still very, very relevant in terms of what our industry and what buyers and corporates were kind of thinking and feeling before the lockdown, because if this pandemic hadn't happened, it would have still been the case. So I suppose to touch on thingy on first, what did the current climate look like when you got those responses back? What was the thoughts and feelings of those that you surveyed?
Yeah, so actually fairly surprising for us. So we spoke to 100 marketeers, largely within the marketing industry, also within finance and tech too. And 55% of those that we spoke to have previously carried out an event, which is really great to see. But really interestingly is that 90% of marketers believe that events are an essential part of their marketing strategy. So there's that slight disparity between those who've actually physically carried out the event and then those that actually feel as though it's a really kind of valued part of their strategy and what they should be delivering. So that's the kind of really kind of hits the core and our feelings before actually carrying out the research into, okay, we know there's a demand out there. What could be the potential barriers? What could be the potential kind of misconceptions around an event? There's obviously a lot of conversation around investment, as you mentioned, the kind of average cost of an event. We know ROI is a huge one for our audience and how that can be proven, not necessarily as straightforward as kind of digital channels, as you mentioned, so kind of social media, email marketing, those elements where it's all kind of online. Traditionally from, I suppose, an understanding of how to easily capture ROI, that's a lot clearer. So it was really interesting to see that as kind of the first off. And then we also asked participants kind of what they would consider as an event. And 34% said something which requires their participation. Which I think, again, is really key now looking towards where we are in the current climate and taking some of these learnings from physical events into the digital realm. And 30% said networking and 18% said immersive theatre. So again, there's that real kind of B2B element, I suppose, with this report, in the sense of a lot of these events do require that kind of networking element, that physical interaction, and again, that kind of ROI aspect of, okay, from this event, I want either the attendees that we brought together to feel as though they've made some really kind of meaningful connections from this, or the brand themselves or the agency themselves to really kind of feel as though they have set up, I suppose, a bit more within their sales pipeline from having this actual experience or conference or whatever they want to kind of frame as part of their event. So that was really interesting for us as a first off. And then, as I mentioned, from kind of understanding what the various objectives would be and kind of what ROI our audience would really want to see from these events. The largest amount by far was, of course, an increase in revenue. So 47% would want to see an increase in revenue from any experiences that they're holding. And then 27% want brand awareness. So I think that really kind of echoes our feeling and conversations that we've been having with clients, you know, articles that we can see across yourself and marketing kind of publications, that gone are the days where clients are kind of, or the majority of the audience, are complacent with having kind of a PR stunt or a big kind of marketing activation to simply get headlines and to grab some share of voice from their competitors. There's also, it's very closely linked to an increase in revenue, be that sales directly at the experience, a knock-on effect of that experience, and that being linked to kind of follow-up spikes in sales. So that in itself as well was really interesting. And then I think just one more on that is the priorities, and what the participants would find as kind of the key objectives, what they're looking for from their events when they're actually putting the event together at the very beginning. And 36% say originality of concept. So that as well, I think, is something really key to pull across to what we're seeing now with the current climate. With the originality of concept, within kind of the physical world of events, I would say that's something which could be channeled through storytelling, through the narrative, through kind of the way you communicate that event, the way it's delivered. But putting that into the digital realm, I feel like it's a little bit trickier. There's a lot of event tech out there. At the moment, it feels like the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of brands, especially in the B2B world, is to use something similar to kind of Zoom for roundtables or thought leadership type events or live streams. But I think the diversity of what's out there and innovation is very much at the beginning stage, and that's something that's really key over the rest of this year. And I think moving into events forward, definitely something that's going to be really, really important for our audience.
Yeah, it's, there's quite a lot there, which I'd love to break some of it down. But I think just on your last point there, what I'm hearing, and my own opinion is, technology companies who are providing the backbone and the networking, the software to enable these online events to happen, are going to have great, healthy businesses. Because I think one of the things that our industry is learning is the need for diversification, the need for a plan B. Actually, some of the benefits of scope in terms of creating a wider net, more eyeballs, and helping those people who might not be able to access your physical events still engage with your brand, your message, and your brand value.
Yeah.
And then, you know, sustainability plays a role into that in terms of logistics and people traveling, and then business sustainability. Maybe that element of getting those 10,000 eyeballs is a lot more cost effective by having a hybrid or virtual online element to your event, rather than saying, right, the aim is to get every single person physically here because we need them in front of us in order to create value. So I think the industry is going to has forced to go through quite quickly a change. I think, yes, there's a lot of Zoom webinars, what on the face of it looks very the same content or the same format, which, you know, there's already, what is it called, Zoom fatigue, and those terms being banded around already after 6 weeks. and you know, because people are using it both for internal comms, keeping in touch with the family, and then business elements. All of a sudden your day just looks like one big Zoom calendar, doesn't it? And it's like, it's just very interesting.
Square eyes as well.
Where I personally think the biggest budgets are going to be spent with online events are very much in that event-led design, experience design. What does this event look like from not just a content delivery, but from a whole experience? How do we feed people into it? What's the back end tail out of it, look out of it? You know, do we create something for those remote participants that still brings them back into the part of the event? You know, lots of people have been talking about Deliveroo vouchers, experience boxes, you know, other aspects and elements that can, you know, even kind of like the Heston Blumenthal, you know, dining experience, which is you've got your headphones on, as you're eating something, you're hearing the sea and all that kind of stuff, and it transports you to where that's going. That could be fed into speaker content, the event itself, and all that kind of stuff. So I think actually for you guys, this is huge opportunity in terms of creating not now just physical events, but online events and a hybridization of both of them. So actually, to some degree, I think where we are now is a good thing. We are very adaptable industry. We are super creative. So if there was one industry where this was going to kind of create a positive, it was ours. It was always going to be ours. Interestingly though, just to dial back a little bit, I'd love to talk about a little bit more on one of your interesting statistics, which you mentioned right at the front, which is 90% of people see it as a really, really important part of comms and marketing and engagement. But I think, was it 45% had never done an event? Have I got that statistic right?
Yeah, 45% hadn't done an event. That's correct. Yeah.
So why is that? Is it because those individuals are restrained in budget? Maybe they can't. Events cost a lot, right? They can cost a lot. And I suppose if you're going to your CFO and saying, can I have 100, 200, 50 grand for this event? And they are sales led, which you mentioned some statistics later on. There's no kind of like calculator out there, is there, where they can go, well, if we get this many people turn up, this will lead to this many sales. You know, they want that, but CFOs and other people want that tangible kind of like thoughts thread to. Is that it, or is there other things going off there as well?
Yeah, so I definitely think that's a strong element, and that's been a really big part of a lot of conversations we've had with our clients, and actually something internally that we're really working on to tie up a lot closer for our clients, and almost to try and kind of categorize, okay, if this is the objective of your event, this is what you should be looking for to determine whether the event's successful. And we'll also obviously help you understand what the performance was, and then help calculate the ROI back to the beginning. And then in terms of the potential barriers to experience, as we've kind of framed it in the report, so what could be that kind of gap that we're seeing, what could be leading to that? We found that a lot of it is to do with budget restrictions, which we kind of assumed would be the case. So 51% of those said that budget restrictions are kind of the main factor as to why they would not undertake an event. And then 29% are saying time restraints, and 14% saying lack of internal experience or expertise, which those two aren't kind of too much of a concern, because of course that's why we're here, to help alleviate those concerns. But I think budget restrictions is a big one, and I really think to pick that apart is definitely looking into, okay, well, what are you trying to achieve from this event? Because I think for a lot of our clients, even though 90% see events as an essential part of the marketing strategy, it's still, I don't believe, kind of the default that they would go to. If they say, for example, a new product launch comes through the door, they'll typically go to their kind of social media, advertising, email marketing, the kind of default marketing mix, and then think, okay, if we incorporate events, that would be a really kind of interesting diversification for us. But I think it's still considered as almost a bit of a risk of kind of, okay, if we do that, then, you know, how do we then prove kind of product sales? How does that link to that? What are we kind of looking for? So really have to kind of think about it in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So whether it's kind of brand awareness, then we can definitely kind of have a look into, okay, how's that impacted your share of voice, the perception of your brand, the sentiment of your brand. Whether it's trying to kind of gain, I suppose, connections or networking. There's definitely loads of tech out there as well that we're working with, and I'm sure there's so many that can help determine, okay, from your event, how many kind of meetings occurred, how many people connected with each other, and also feedback itself from the participants and how they found that event. And kind of how they perceived, or how whether they kind of found the content of the event relevant, whether they enjoyed kind of the kind of layout, the structure, the kind of all of the sides that you're putting together for it. And then I think lastly, there's definitely that sales element that you mentioned, and how that can be linked to the actual event. So whether it's included as part of the event, whether there's a platform that's used as part of that, whether there's some sort of kind of campaign codes that you can link towards it. So I definitely think there's a lot out there that can absolutely help with justifying ROI from these events. It just completely depends on what the initial objective is, and the way that the experience is activated. Because really kind of the value that you place on the event is completely subjective to what you're looking to gain. So it's a really interesting one.
And for me,
think about.
Direct sales is one part of it, but you know, some of the other elements that you've mentioned as possibly lower priorities actually make up a bigger proportion of the reason to do it, right? So press, I think that was quite a low one. However, if an event captures that eyes and minds of trade press and then maybe national press, you know, if you were to quantify that based on, let's say, the old school way of working, column inches or advertising spend, that could be 5-10 times what that investment has been. And that's long tail stuff, right? That will have an impact on sales long term because you've created brand equity and mind share with a lot larger audience that would have never been even possibly aware of your physical event or there. And you know, some of the other sections, you know, brand awareness, like brand awareness is one of these things that's generally thrown away. Well, it doesn't really matter. But you know, there was a guy called Samuel Scott who works for the Drum who tweeted not just recently saying that if you had $1 for every time that somebody says it's only the product that matters, it's not the awareness. Like if nobody knows about your product or service, if nobody has time to feel and touch your brand and engage with your company, how are they ever going to buy from you? We know we buy from people and we buy from brands that we trust and all that kind of stuff. That stuff doesn't always come across as an advert, right? It's, you know, a banner on a website can't build trust and brand equity and relationships. It just doesn't work. So I think it's really interesting that hopefully maybe some of the technology can help us with this. We can start to build frameworks and showcase how much all of this other stuff is actually super valuable that will impact direct sales long term. We'll hopefully get there one day. Moving on a little bit further into the report, I know your report touched upon on some of the future things, some of the future thoughts and feelings of the companies that you interviewed and the individuals that you interviewed. Do you have any interesting tidbits around that? Because I see some here in front of me, but I don't want to take it away from you before you explain. But that's really interesting, some of the stuff that the future holds for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the largest one that we saw in terms of what I suppose the future trends would be for 2020. So initially this was created at the back end of last year. Headlining that was sustainability, which again, we know from you know, conversations we're having with clients, from our own initiatives internally, from what we're seeing in the press. It's such a huge talking point, and something which I think in general as a society we're moving towards much more of having a much more kind of environmentally conscious I suppose kind of take on everything that we're doing, and economically as well. So 48% saying they want to see greater transparency from brands on sustainability. It was kind of leading that, which we heavily kind of agree with and believe. And then 37% were looking or expecting to see a wider use of immersive AR and VR technology, which I find really interesting, because I feel as though not just within the events industry, but within a lot of other industries, AR and VR have been kind of real kind of hot topics for the last few years, and there's been so much kind of conversation around how we're going to see a lot more of that within even consumers' homes, and how that's going to become normalized so much more, but we haven't quite got to that point, I would say. I mean, we have a lot of conversations with some of our big tech clients who are very innovative themselves, and really kind of, you know, pioneering emerging technology and fostering that industry. But it's still not something that's almost a default or a given within those events, which I feel as though that's something that's really missing. And at the moment, as we're kind of exploring from such a creative industry, as you mentioned, ways that we can bring that innovation, the immersiveness, the creativity into the digital sphere from the physical side of our industry. This is where I think we will see a big growth in that this year, whether or not it would have happened without this kind of almost this nudge or this push forward from the current climate at the moment. I think when you think about the kind of theatrical side of our industry, the storytelling side, that's something which is going to become really prevalent, and really kind of excited to see that take up from not only industries that we would expect, so say for example kind of the secret cinema side, the more theatrical side of the industry. I also think from kind of B2B side, conferencing, from kind of even things like wellness and sports, I think there's a huge opportunity there, and hopefully we'll see that kind of explode a little bit more this year, definitely.
I think those two statistics are very complementary to each other, because I believe that technology can help a huge amount towards events being sustainable. We've seen it already adopted by our industry quite widely, that the replacement of the printed event brochure or printed literature with event apps, that was kind of one of those easy transitions from a cost perspective, from a printing perspective, from a recycling perspective. That just makes sense, right? Not only that, it's more likely to be kept hold of. But I think, you know, one of those things that we have to wait for is for our audience to somewhat catch up. You know, event apps would have never gone off the ground before we had the devices as attendees, bringing them with us, bringing our own devices to events to enable us to be able to download and engage with them if we should so wish. Nobody was going to be pushing event apps before smartphones. It wouldn't have happened. And if they did, I don't know about it, but that'd be an interesting sell. And then, you know, we talk about VR and AR. I think AR is going to be the bigger play in our sector than VR, personally, at physical events, just because, you know, we're already walking around with devices with AR capabilities. I think that the barrier needs to change somewhat, maybe as we see more people buy, you know, ocular devices, whether those be glasses or things that they generally wear and have on them without having to take their phone out, because we know how jarring that is at an event. If we all of a sudden kind of looking around and we take a phone out and we're engaging with somebody, that's like, it's rude, right? It's the social norm still exists within face-to-face events. So AR is going to be really interesting from a sustainability perspective. Maybe we don't need to print directional signage and branding anymore. It's just a case of people can find and navigate and wayfind using their own devices. Sustainability straight out the box. VR is interesting, I think, in those more immersive experiences, right? So you want to partake in, let's say, a story as part of an event. And rather than build a big stage or a set and have all that theatrical equipment and the theatre and all that kind of stuff, you can participate there at the event or away from the event in that part of that experience. I'm an early adopter. I bought a VR headset and actually it's gone. It's out of my life because I just didn't feel there was enough out there or enough compelling reasons for me at the moment to use that technology. I'm sure as that technology filters down and all of a sudden, you know, our phones will be able to do what these big headsets do and we just kind of slip it in the Google Cardboard thing. Again, it'll have a rise. VR and AR absolutely can help towards sustainability. And I'm really glad that one of the future things that you've brought out of this report is the key of sustainability, because that's something we're really passionate about here at Event Industry News. You know, we've worked hard to kind of raise awareness of what others are doing sustainably. You know, some have been cost prohibitive and that's why other materials have been used and things like that. So it's super interesting, the report that you've created. So Rachel, in terms of the rest of the report, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners and viewers on kind of interesting parts of what came out of that report?
So I think aside from the areas that we've covered, it's really the kind of purchasing habits that are linked to activations as well. So the fact that 98% of users feel more inclined to purchase after attending an event, which is very much kind of linked to the physical aspect and the emotive aspect and the memorable aspect that we kind of discussed at the beginning of the podcast. But also experiences in general account for a reported 70% of regular customer acquisition. So it's really just kind of emphasizing the broader spectrum that's available there in terms of the experiences themselves, leaning on participation, leaning on the originality of concept, and these, I suppose, creative aspects and human connection aspects of physical events, and that being now kind of transcended into the digital arena. And what from this report, that's kind of what we learnt and what we took away from it. But I think at the moment, adapting that to what we're seeing in the current climate is again just leading it back to that real hybrid of the events world, and how actually digital and physical events have their own benefits, and you can't replace one with the other, and they both really kind of complement each other. And what we're seeing from what's out there and what conversations we're having with our clients is the most successful event strategies really have that dual aspect, and parts of both. So maybe you kind of begin with a digital series, which then leads to a physical counterpart. Maybe you have specific elements that appeal to different parts of your audience. That really what's kind of key to take away here is the fact that dual aspect is what we're going to see moving forward a lot more, and what's going to result in the most successful strategies.
That's excellent. I mean, congratulations on doing this report. I think, to be fair to myself, probably anybody else listening to this, these kind of insights are really what help people strategize about what they're going to do going forward, not only as agencies and event organizers and things like that, but as those companies who need some concrete evidence and some understanding of what their event play might look like going forward. And I suppose even so much as to back up and give evidence for those marketers, to their CFOs and the people up that they're justifying these event spends too, to say, listen, this is what we can gain over and above direct sales. This is the future of the industry. This is how we can create more brand awareness, more brand equity. There's so much to it. So, again, well done to you for kind of doing this. I hope that we'll see a 2020 edition, a 2021 edition, a 2022 edition. I hope it's something that you absolutely keep doing. For those people listening or watching though, Rachel, where can people go and download their own copy of this report? And I think it's important to stress that it is open, it's free, isn't it? You just kind of have to qualify yourself with some details and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's on our website, so marbleldn.com, and within our blog section, our Marble Thoughts area of the site.
Awesome. And if anybody wants to kind of connect up with you and chat to you in a little bit more detail about your own experiences of the report, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn. So take a look and connect. And yeah, I'll be happy to have any follow-up conversations, definitely.
Awesome. Rachel, thank you very much for coming on today. Anybody listening or watching the podcast today, do connect up with Rachel, download a copy of the report. We'll also link to it in the show notes below the post. Give this podcast a share if you think your network would also benefit from the report. Rachel, thank you again for coming on, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Adam. Speak to you soon.